Happy International Women's Day.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You're the first person to wish me happy International Women's Day.
What's the advantage of getting you at 5 o'clock in the morning or whenever you get up?
That's right. Yeah, the time zone is a real challenge between Denver, Colorado, and London in the UK.
Exactly. And we'll get on to actually things like that a bit later. That's a really interesting point as we talk about our topic today, where we're having a conversation about it's International Women's Day, and the theme is breaking the bias, and we're at Women's World Banking looking at the role really of male allyship in helping women, well, helping create organizations that are diverse. It's not really helping women, it's helping the organizations, right? Because this is it's not a male or a female thing. I think I've heard from one of our panels, it's actually an organizational thing. And organizations that are more diverse are better and more innovative and what have you. So I've asked you if you'd come on here to basically teach me as a wannabe male ally, how men can help build that environment for women to help make organizations more diverse. So thank you for being up for guiding me through this.
Yeah, and thanks for inviting me. This is my very first vlog, so I hope I'm doing it right. But maybe you just asked me a question, but maybe I could just turn the tables on you and ask you a question to start, if that's okay.
Yeah.
How do you do it all? How do you balance your role as a father with being an executive at a global nonprofit?
So you've hit me straight away with one of the double standards for women professionals, haven't you? Which is and we were talking a little bit. So for anyone listening, that question came when Sonja and I were talking about. I used to work when I was handling media relations and working with women executives. Sometimes when we did profiling, magazines would ask, well, that question, how are you a successful banking executive and a mother? And I told people not to answer it because they would never ask a man that question, but it was a normalized question that people felt they could, and often women journalists felt that they could ask these women bankers. And so I guess, Sonja, you're putting me on the, and I felt uncomfortable. It felt really uncomfortable answering that question because suddenly I had to tacitly accept the fact that I was no longer this executive, but I was also this other person, this father or mother or what, and suddenly that was coming into a conversation where it didn't need to come into. And I guess that's something women, especially mothers, have to cope with every day. And this is an example of sort of well-meaning yet unintended bias.
Yeah, I think that's the point. Is it like it's well-meaning, but it ends up creating a situation where women feel like somebody is accusing them of not focusing 100% on their job. I get this question, a similar question all the time when I travel for conferences. People say, "Who's taking care of your kids while you're here?" And I just think, like, would you ask a man that? Like, who's taking care of your kids while you're here? And I'm always like, well, their father, of course. Like, I didn't just leave them on the street to come here. So,
Taking care? Oh my God.
Oh, I forgot. Yeah, like what? It's always so frustrating. I actually kind of disagree with you though about sort of what the normative or what should be done about this. I think the answer shouldn't be, everybody should leave their personal selves at the door. In fact, we did some research recently. It's our most recent publication. It was case studies of women leaders in financial institutions, and they all wanted to talk about points in their career where they were really balancing and figuring out how to do both, how to really focus on their personal life for some reason, either education or family, while also maintaining a career. And in each case, they found really creative ways to make sure one didn't get in the way of the other. And the most successful women credited their organizations for supporting both men and women in their personal roles and responsibilities for their families.
So that's the key point, isn't it? So I'm hearing 2 points in there. First of all, bringing your whole self to work involves the mother and the family side of things, and that's true for a man as well. It's true for somebody who doesn't have children but has other, you've got to be able to bring all of you to your workplace and not just part of you. Um, and I wonder if and then the second part of that is also sort of what I'm hearing a little bit is in the lockdown that really came crashing through, didn't it? In the we're still doing all our Zoom calls. We're bringing no longer are we that poor BBC interviewee whose children sort of came in. We're all that person now, right? And it's normal now to bring that other side of you to the forefront. But it's about the organizational culture that allows you to do that, and doesn't try and take that piece away from you. So you should be really embracing that rather than shying away from it. Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, and normalizing it for both men and women.
Men and women.
Yeah, making sure men get paternity leave when there's a new baby in the home, or one thing I notice is you don't shy away from talking about your family when it's appropriate. So like you get on a call, oh, my son, whatever, I can't get him off with video games. And that normalization of a fully integrated person who can bring their whole self to work as appropriate, I think is really useful. Also, having the flexibility to shift your work schedule. So there's somebody on the research team, and he is the one who's at home for a certain amount of time during the day. And during nap time, when he can't get his kids down, he just says like, I'm just gonna take this time off, and can we schedule that meeting for later? And I think those kinds of policies and cultural moments and shifts are really important for women being able to do it all, quote, and not feel like they have to apologize for it.
And so I'm picking up on something around organizational culture here. And maybe sort of organizational culture has shifted generally, but do you feel that there are certain industries or cultures or environments that do lend themselves to that, and some that don't? And I'm thinking about then the attractiveness of those industries to women, because the acquisition of talent is a really important part of this conversation, and if men are not creating that kind of environment as you come into the organization and culturally, then you're not even going to get women applying for some of these roles, right? Let alone staying in the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you and I have been doing some work on like climate, algorithmic bias has been a topic we've covered, and use of data science is something that we've really been leaning into as an organization. And we've noticed that a lot of the big names in all of those industries are men, in part because they're STEM careers or STEM industries and have sort of a gender attached to them. So we see like data analysts and coders and scientists tend to be men. And in fact, I saw a study, I think I shared it with you, that in the climate space, because green jobs are going primarily to men, it's actually, if the green jobs industry increases in its importance in economies, it's going to set back the pay equity for women a number of years, which is just so frustrating because it's a progressive issue that might actually be setting women back. So yeah, I mean, I really struggle with this because it's not something that we can solve sort of on the hiring level. It seems like it's something that goes back to education and experience and how people see themselves and their futures, and whether they see themselves in a particular job or a particular career.
It's really interesting though, isn't it? Because from a one of the things I've heard a lot is the need for managers to understand not just women, but your entire team's life, especially in this kind of lockdown environment, or the Zoom environment, should we call it, where it'd be really important to know that so and so's kids got a ball game and so they need to leave early, or how many children you have and what their ages are, and it gives you an insight into what people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and also giving them the flexibility to be able to structure their work lives in a way that suits them, and while still doing their work. What can again male allies do to create the right environment around some of those issues, sort of understanding their direct reports' work life without overreaching, without being overbearing, and without sort of overstepping their mark?
Yeah, I guess the conflict comes in when information is, again, like, get information with good intentions. So like, do you need to take a time off? Oh, you're pregnant. That must, let's figure out how we can make that work. If you have health related challenges associated with that. But if that could be used against a woman in some way, then I mean, there's a good reason why legally in interview processes we can't ask people about those things, about gender related family and health issues. And so I think your opening question kind of in this line is of culture. It all comes back to culture. Like, if we can create a culture in which those things are supported and valued, and when people self-volunteer the information, that they are met with with allyship and empowerment. I think that's the answer. I also wonder about, you asked about managers. I also wonder about peers as well. Like, we did this research on staff within a financial institution in Cambodia called AMK. And we did this fascinating LinkedIn analysis where we looked up all of the employees at AMK, and then we looked at everybody who started at the bottom of, or sort of entry level, as either tellers or loan officers. And then we kind of mapped their career trajectory. It took a lot of work, you can imagine. Yeah. So we found, first of all, that women tended to be tellers and men tended to be loan officers. But this had a massive implication for the trajectory of their careers. So like, the women ended up being kind of like back office, HR, kind of supporting roles after being a teller. And then the men, since they had been in the field with the clients, they ended up moving on to product development and eventually management with related implications. And this was in part because there was either an assumption or a reality that women didn't want to be in the field, traveling 3 hours a day on motorcycles to go to meet with the clients. But in that context, I wondered, one, if there were ways that men colleagues of kind of entry-level women could create opportunities. Like, oh, I mostly work in the city and I don't have a long way to go to meet with my clients. Is that an opportunity for a woman to take this loan officer job? Or similarly, like, are there, on the flip side, like, are there women who might point out, like, it's funny that all of us tellers are women. Why don't we, get some men in here so they understand this job a little bit better, and our organization will be more balanced as a result. I think that question of male allyship at all levels is a really good one. And culture isn't just created from the top; it's also how colleagues engage with one another.
Yeah, so that's so interesting, because in a sort of another story, you hear sort of examples of that where well-meaning managers someone comes back from maternity leave, and there's a job that requires travel, endless nights away from family and home, and a well-meaning manager may go, well, so and so can't do, the woman can't do that because she's got to go home and look after her kids, and so therefore that all those roles which are sort of a bit more high profile and a bit more, involved, go to the men, and that in itself is a bias. But again, it's a well-intentioned or well-meaning bias. But I guess, and then I guess to your point, the fix is almost sort of something I've heard about in one of our webinars about networks and the importance of networks within organizations. So you do have that sort of gravity base of people who are talking about these issues and helping people understand the impact of decisions on these individuals.
This is a great opportunity for me to ask you some, I don't know, some critical and challenging questions too. And I'm just like very aware that, you are a male manager and I am a female direct report. And thinking back in my career, I've reported to a lot of men. And I think there are in many places, although this is actually not a problem role banking has, but in many places there are like a lot of structural inequalities with senior roles being held by men and more junior employees. And so I don't know, I wonder if you're kind of self-aware of that, and if you think about that in your management, or if you have before in more structurally unequal organizations.
I think a lot of it is based on my background and cultural upbringing. And I think, certainly for a lot of men, especially older men in developed markets, or even men in developing markets, they are a product of their experiences and their culture and how they were raised by their own parents and their own kind of role models. And then they kind of bring that into the organization, and so it extends. In my background, I've only ever had one male manager. The fact that I've always reported by and large to women has definitely shaped my outlook on life. And I also, am very conscious of my own unconsciousness towards my own biases, because we are very complex beings, not men, people. We're all very complex, and we all have these experiences that shape our natural reactions to things. And I think checking yourself as a leader should be just something you do automatically. Whether you're in an environment where you're managing diversity, or whatever it is, I think self-awareness is just a huge attribute as a leader, and being open to people giving you insights into how you come across, because ultimately you are a little bit closeted, aren't you, in a leadership position, and people may be a little bit worried about talking to you, and so again it goes back to culture. What is the culture that you want to bring into the organization? Are you a culture of do what I say? Are you a culture of my view is the right one? I think those sorts of leadership styles are really dissipating now, thankfully. And leaders are more sort of open and empathetic and servant leadership, and in doing that you've got to naturally create diverse organizations, because you're not able to operate with just you in charge, right? Because and then I think there's sort of in hiring, we naturally tend to a bias of hiring ourselves, don't we? Because we like ourselves, and so therefore so I think naturally checking that and just making sure you've got a diverse panel of candidates and a diverse set of people looking at the panel, and then making the best decision on the best person naturally brings kind of diversity into things. So I think as a leader, I think you've got to be consciously paranoid about your own biases, and ruthlessly stamping them out as much as you possibly can. in my case, and I'm sure many people will say very unsuccessfully, but let me throw it back to you. You know, what leadership styles have you seen and noticed that are effective at creating diversity, and which styles sort of shut it down?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I think mentorship is something we haven't talked about yet that's tremendously effective at encouraging women's leadership, and not just like women mentoring women, which I think is what people naturally think to, like, oh, she's a woman, she needs a woman mentor. But I know that like in our leadership and diversity program, we encourage more senior men to mentor the women who are participating in our program, because one, that doesn't place undue burden on senior women leaders to serve as mentors to all of the upcoming women, but also it kind of breaks this breaks down these gender barriers and creates a male champion who has systematically more powers. I think that's like one thing I would say is maybe a good one. Where I have seen challenges is where there's just not a lot of opportunity for women. So I worked in a large bureaucratic government organization for a while, and the men, it was like mostly male senior leadership, and they stayed in their positions. Like there was just not a lot of mobility, not a lot of movement. And so any amount of professional development for women or mentorship, like it just meant that the institution ended up losing their best women employees because there was like nowhere for them to grow, either laterally because of the constraints of this bureaucratic organization, or upward. And I think that was a big challenge. The world that you're kind of sketching out here, or that you've sort of articulated, in terms of changes that are happening in global organization culture. I wonder, I don't know, what's your prediction for whether this might increase the number of women leaders in the financial sector? Like can we increase the 14 women in charge of central banks around the world to something higher than 14?
So these things are sort of very slow moving, but I would probably look less at women as the head of certain things and more the mix of women on management teams and what they do. And you know, I think I mean, of course, we want to see equality in women CEOs. There's not enough women CEOs, you know, in financial services. I think Jane Fraser was famously one of the first, if not the first, you know, at Citibank to run a global organization. But often, you know, I've witnessed in financial services leadership teams where women are on the leadership team, but they're in, you know, these gendered roles like HR or marketing or communications or you know, something like that. And when you start to get women in innovative roles like, you know, innovation in product, in finance, and start to sort of see that shift changing, that's when I think you're going to start to see really positive change, because that means then that the women themselves have come through a system in order to get to that point. And the woman at BP, who was head of innovation, she said, well, I studied at Aberdeen University. I was one of 3 women on that course in engineering. So only 3 women on that course at Aberdeen Engineering, you know. And so therefore, how do we expect there to be hundreds of women in engineering jobs in oil majors, you know, when there's only 3 women at, you know, Aberdeen University who are studying engineering? So I think that it's that long tail shift that we're going to start to see. And I think, you know, getting more women into STEM, you know, getting women into more sort of traditionally male studies, I think is going to be as equally important than you know, trying to sort of engineer diversity in management teams. Having said that, though, you know, the environment we're in at the moment, and I think you alluded to it in the question, does give everybody a bit more flexibility. We don't have to be in the office at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning and, you know, juggle home life and school life. There is more flexibility. And I think that flexibility is really going to benefit women in particular. And I hope it does. And so maybe we need more of that in order to give people a bit more of a chance. Sorry, that was long-winded. Did that answer your question?
It did, and it makes me think of we've done some research on algorithms and unfairness in algorithms. And one thing that happens in the creation of an algorithm, if it's a machine learning algorithm, which means it decides on its own or with only light guidance from a human, it decides what's important. Algorithm ends up being biased towards the group with the highest data representation. So like if an organization is only 10% women and 90% men, the culture is going to be built around men because women are not well represented. And so things like performance reviews, they might prioritize kind of male adjectives like leader or visionary or, you know, those kinds of things, whereas women leaders might get called bossy or micromanaging or something. And so I think, you know, just thinking to my own research, it kind of supports that idea that with a larger critical mass of women in an organization and increased representation at all levels, not just looking at the most senior leader, that will be what naturally creates culture change, because you can't ignore 50% or you can't you can't sideline 50%. It's just not possible.
Yeah. So I guess, you know, for male allies, making sure that those voices are heard and represented and help shape the culture will then start to create that kind of credit scoring that you're talking about with algorithms that start to sort of normalize that. And like, how do you normalize that? How do men do that? Is it conversations? Is it just open dialogue? Is it giving people space? What can leaders do to help create that kind of 50% normalization culture?
Well, the 50% comes through hiring, which is always tricky, which we haven't really focused on a whole lot, because you can't preferentially hire women, but you can increase the number of women or representation of women in the pipeline so that you can make sure there are more women to choose from in the applicant pool. But then in terms of culture, in terms of kind of raising the volume on the voice of women, however representative they are, some things I've seen is men very intentionally giving women the floor in meetings and saying, what do you think of that? I also appreciate the way that like when men are aware of and intentional about the way they talk about women. So, you know, not making jokes about, you know, women, they love to talk, you know, those kinds of things, but rather, you know, kind of empowering women in the way they talk about them, talking about their, I don't know, their daughters or their partners, their female partners as being impressive or strategic, or I don't know, showing ways in which their colleagues are making a really significant contribution as a leader to a project. Or you know, one thing I see in academia a lot is, you know, academia is still very male dominated. It's like men putting their names first on publications because they are more senior. But I think one thing that I've started noticing in men who are good allies is increasing women's visibility. So like if you're in a writing team of 3 or more, the first author ends up being the one who gets the citation when it's like an in-text citation. And there was a situation last year where we had a group of 3 authors, 2 men and 1 woman, and the 3 authors together, and in part because of the advocacy of the men, decided to do the names in alphabetical order so it was fair, and it ended up that the woman was first. And so a woman in her early 20s, sort of at the start of her career. I just cited her yesterday in some research that I was doing, and I thought, oh, this is so good.
It's such an interesting point, because I find myself just thinking about you brought up your daughter. When I talk to my children, I've got a boy and a girl. The way I talk to them is very different, and the way I talk to the boy is you know, more masculine, and oh, man up, grow up, stop crying. And the daughter, it's more nurturing. And again, back to our experiences and how they shape us as we grow up. It really starts that early, doesn't it? In the way that boys and girls are expected, and this whole debate, and we're probably getting into what some people might call woke, but this whole concept of boys toys and girls toys, and the way that boys and girls learn, there are differences, but we reinforce those differences, don't we, with our biases, and the types of toys they have, and how they're expected to behave from a very young age, and so therefore they are going to bring that into the environment, into the work environment.
One of our researchers was just at a conference, and the person presenting was very impressive. She's top of her field, and a definite leader in the academic space in Colombia. And the discussant afterwards kept saying things like, "Oh, she's making a wonderful contribution to the field," and it was all of these soft leadership words. And would you say that to a man who's the top of his field? Like, do you say to a very senior male scholar, "Oh, you're just doing a wonderful job"? No, you would say, like, "You're doing groundbreaking research." And we do it to all ages. And I think the first step is kind of being aware of that, and then starting to be intentional about reducing men's need to be hyper masculine, and or men's need to be sort of insensitive and unfeeling in order to succeed, and women's need to be sort of sensitive and caring in order to succeed. I think that's a big challenge.
So yeah, I mean, we're not going to solve sort of parenting here. We're sort of dealing with financial services, but it's really interesting watch out. And as part of sort of as a man, I feel it's part of another list of things where I have to check my bias. And I guess that's what I'm sort of taking away from this conversation. Sort of there's so many opportunities just to check what you do and check your biases and ask. That's the other thing. Ask. Did I do it wrong? How could I have done that better? And how could I have included you more? Or how could I have made a more sort of inclusive environment? I guess as a leader, you've got to be a little bit sort of open to not getting it right, and being willing to sort of learn from that. But from your perspective, because I guess we're sort of coming up to time, but I'd love drawing on your experiences as a woman sort of working through financial services, through government, through research, through whatever your experiences are. What can male allies, a couple of pointers for male allies. What are the most important things that, drawing on your experiences, men can look out for?
I think it is valuable to break the bias, and that's the theme of this International Women's Day today. We're seeing it all over Twitter and LinkedIn. But the goal of breaking the bias is mostly so women should be able to be fully themselves. And I think the goal is not no bias. The goal is what happens as a result of a world where there is not bias. So not everybody should leave their self at the door when they come into work, but a situation where I can ask my male colleagues, like, how was your weekend, and how was the kids' soccer game? And there's also space for me to be fully myself and integrate my full self as I feel comfortable. And then women being able to be fully themselves as leaders. So not having to use soft skills to get ahead, but like being able to be really visionary and forward thinking, and aggressive if they need to be, and if that's part of who they are, like allowing women to be that, and not exhibiting bias against them when they use those qualities in their leadership. The one thing we also talked about that I think is really important is making sure women are not alone, and this, like, women being able to be fully themselves means they see other people like them working with them so that they feel confident and comfortable and not like everybody's looking at them all the time. And I think these are all things that male allies can help with as we seek to, hashtag break the bias today.
Okay. Well, look, Sonja, as ever, it's a fascinating conversation, and I feel like we've just sort of hit the tip of the iceberg with a lot of these things. But I guess, my message is it's a journey, right? We're not going to become allies. Well, no, we can become allies, but we're not going to be successful allies overnight. I think we've got to keep working hard at it, and it's something worth working hard at. So I think, what I would ask you is keep working with us, and help us understand, how we can become better allies to each other. And I think that's kind of open dialogue, isn't it? So I'm glad we had the conversation today, to talk about it, and hopefully we can continue to have that conversation as we move forward. But thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, and thanks for your support on International Women's Day.
A pleasure. See you later.